Well, I went to Bakersfield High School, and my whole family had been involved in the oil fields. They didn't own the oil fields, they worked in the oil fields. And that was where I was headed. And I liked to play football. So I went to junior college in Bakersfield and made All-American Junior College, and went to USC as a sophomore. And USC was one of the first colleges in the West to travel to the East. As a matter of fact, when I was a senior at USC, it was the first time I ever came to New York. We played Army in Yankee Stadium. And I remember walking out and looking around and thinking, wow. I'd be looking around like every other country boy at these big lights. And all of a sudden here I was coming up the dugout that Joe DiMaggio had come up. And the reason being that Mr. Mara, he scouted me at that Army game. And I had a big game against Army. And it enabled a young kid from Bakersfield to have a big game in Yankee Stadium. It was amazing to me that I would wind up there a year later.
And as fate would have it, Gifford was selected as the Giants' first-round pick in the 1952 draft.
I was driving up to Mount Baldy to go skiing, and I had the radio on, and they were talking sports, and they're talking about the NFL draft, and I was just kind of listening to it. And then USC, Frank Gifford went to the New York Giants #1. I thought, what? I went, what? It was not a shock. It was kind of laughable to me, and that's how I heard about the fact that I was going to be drafted by the Giants. When I arrived here in 1952, my first contract from Wellington Merritt was $8,000 and a $250 signing bonus. And I played a little bit on offense, played behind Kyle Rote, and he was better than me on one leg. But every now and then he'd hurt the other leg, and I'd end up playing offense. Other than that, I played all defense. I loved to play, and I guess I had this kind of all-around ability, whereas some people that can really fast and they can do certain things, run over people. I could do all of it fairly well.
As the Giants began to rise in the NFL, Gifford quickly became one of New York's shining stars, and his impact would help the Giants return to glory in 1956.
Well, 1956 was a very special year by any standard. And the magic really came from the Polo Grounds, I guess, in 55. When we moved over to Yankee Stadium, it just exploded. But it was a magical, magical thing. I remember the first day we walked in there in 1956. The Yankees had gone ahead and, of course, won the World Series, and we finally got to move into the locker room. And I remember walking out there and looking around and thinking about all the things that had transpired in Yankee Stadium. And New York had all of a sudden awakened to the fact that there was a professional football team. And it wasn't just the Yankees, it wasn't just DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris. All of a sudden we were selling out Yankee Stadium. You put that all together into a magical year, if you will. It was the year that Lombardi took control of the offense. We had Vince Lombardi as the offensive coach, Tom Landry as our defensive coach. So we had a great defense in 1956. And defense wins. You're not going to lose a game if the team doesn't score any points. And first person I know that brought intelligence, strategy, and tactics into defense was Tom Landry. And he developed the 4-3 defense, which still is the dominant defense in pro football today. And we had the best defense in football, and we had a pretty good offense. And the offense was growing up. And we had a magical season. We wound up beating the Chicago Bears for the NFL championship 47-7 in Yankee Stadium. And to win the championship in New York was something very special too, socially. As far as I'm concerned, that was when not only the Giants arrived, that was when pro football arrived. Sam Huff is a great player and a great friend of mine now. He even talks to me once in a while. And because the defense did not talk to the offense, and he carried that on for many, many years. But our defense had a great deal of pride, and not only were they really good, and you talk about Andy Robustelli, Jim Katcavage, Dick Modulewski, Rosie Greer, Emma Tennell in the backfield, Sam Huff in the middle. This was a very, very special group of people. One of the great things that happened in one particular game, we were going back and forth. We'd three and we'd punt, and in would come the defense, they'd stop them again. But I remember coming out about the third quarter, and we had gone nowhere. And we'd 3 and out again, and we're walking off the field. Huff jumped in front of our offensive team, kept jumping up and said, "Can't you guys go out there and at least hold them for a while?" Screaming and yelling. And it's a miracle we didn't have actual physical fights with them, probably because the offense knew better. it sort of personifies what Sam was all about. He had such pride in, first himself, in the defense.
I was very happy with playing in New York. I was very happy having Frank Gifford as a teammate, and Y.A. Tittle, and Charlie Connolly, and Roosevelt Brown, and Roosevelt Greer, and Emlyn Tennell, and Jimmy Patton, and all those great ball players. They were stars in themselves.
In the years that we played against what I think is the greatest running back of all time, Jim Brown, it was fun just to watch as Sam prepared for that week coming up against Cleveland. As we got closer to Sunday, it became even more and more intense. Of course, the media had picked up on this. It was Brown, Sam Huff, Brown, Sam Huff. A couple of games I remember late in his career, and in the '58 game, I think, we had to play the Browns back-to-back. We had to beat them back-to-back, and he played out of his world. I think he shut Jimmy Brown down to something like, I don't know, half a dozen yards in one game. Jim never hurt us in either one of those two games, which was truly remarkable. Those are the games we had to win to get in to play the Baltimore Colts. And Sam, along with our defense, as they pointed out to us many, many times over, for many, many years, they won those games for us.
With the popularity of football on the rise in 1958, Gifford and Huff would be two of New York's biggest stars, and together they would help lead the Giants back to the NFL title game. In a game that would become a defining moment in NFL history, the Giants would battle the Baltimore Colts in what would become known as the greatest game ever played.
Everything building to 1958 was the rebirth of pro football. I think it was the wise and very intelligent use of television that had helped this game pick up fans around the entire country. And all of a sudden, people were watching football more than anything they watched on television. And it became a real boost. I mean, it just grew up overnight. And the '58 championship game of Baltimore, played in Yankee Stadium, was a classic.
Keep your eyes on Gifford at left half. He slides out for Connolly's pass. Drives through Davis for a touchdown. And the amazing Giants take the lead.
The thing that set us so far apart are the great players who were recognized later in their careers or 10 years after their careers. You ask most pro football fans who played in the championship in 1958, Baltimore, New York. Johnny Unitas, I remember him, and Charlie Connolly was the quarterback. People remember that game.
From the Giant 13, Connerly nails Rote on the crossover. Kyle shakes off Davis and Tassett, but Nelson hits him and the ball pops loose. Webster picks it up and gallops downfield. Pandemonium grips Yankee Stadium.
I mean, it was a crazy, crazy day. And they didn't win it so much as we lost it.
Unitas gives to Amici. The Colts are the world champions. Amici scores.
The Colts win 23-17 as Bedlam breaks loose. Goalposts totter as Yankee Stadium, football capital of the year, closes down a glorious Giant season and the greatest game ever played.
But out of that grew these sort of bigger-than-life people. And, of course, one of the great players of all time, Johnny Unitas, he, of course, was a legendary one. Raymond Barry, great receiver. I wrote a book about it a couple years ago. I went out and I found everyone who was still alive, 35-man rosters, and at the time, I think we had 18 Baltimore Colts, 17 New York Giants who were still alive. I talked to each and every one of them, visited with most of them, and it was a fascinating journey for me. And that one game in 1958 meant so much to all of us. And it just kind of grew, and it had such an enormous impact on all of our lives.
You talk about Y.A. Tittle. For me, it was Frank Gifford.
Oh,
like
sure.
Frank would come around, and I lived in the city. I was one of the few that lived in New York City, and he would tell me these stories. Oh, my house, my apartment was the epicenter, right? There was players there, the politicians were there, the police were there, like everybody was there. And I kind of wanted to be him.
Yeah.
He was an icon for me in so many ways, and to get a chance as a young player to interact with him was something that was special. It made me feel like I was part of that history.
He was the golden boy, and he was like
he was
Mr.
the man.
New York.
He was Frank Gifford. I said,
I was talking to him once, and we were pretty good friends. I met him many, many times. And I said, I'd like to hang out with you one night. And he goes, I bet you would. Okay, thank you.
I'd fallen in love with New York. It was just a magic time to be here. Everywhere we went, we'd go into Madison Square Garden for a championship fight, and the crowd would stand up and start applauding. When New York loved you, you were really loved, wherever you went. You walk in a restaurant, people would stand up. It was an incredible time. And there was no competition, there were no jets, there was nothing, there was us. And had taken over this city. One of the first places I wanted to go when I came to New York socially was Twitch Shores. And it was a fun place to go because you'd sit in the corner and you'd never know who was going to come in. I remember one day I went into Twitch Shores for lunch. And he asked me if I was alone. I said, yeah. And he said, well, I'll sit this crumb bum friend of mine. I'll put you with him. It was Ernest Hemingway. And I had lunch with Ernest Hemingway. And I had to pinch myself when I left. But Ernest Hemingway was kind of caught up in this new magic that was taking place with pro football in general. But the fact that it took place in New York, and we wound up at the championship in '56, we wound up with a great football team, and a great game in 1958 against the Baltimore Colts, a sudden death game. All of this spread the magic because at the same time, television was erupting.
With a new era underway, Gifford and the Giants would become a dominant force in the league. And with the popularity of pro football on the rise throughout the country, the advertising world would hone in on Gifford and his teammates' celebrity status by putting them in dozens of advertisements and TV commercials.
We did advertisements for anything and everything. Charlie Connor became so famous, the Marlboro Man. He was the first Marlboro Man, our quarterback. And I did Lucky Strike commercials. And keep in mind, this was long before the Surgeon General's report. And every major product you could imagine was being sold through an advertising agency on Madison Avenue, and they were just absolutely caught up with pro football.
Hey, Joe, are you still using that greasy kid stuff on your hair? What else? Vitalis. That's what else.
You don't need greasy kid stuff. Try Vitalis. Smooth, easy.
Gifford was the Prince of New York, and the Giants were the toast of the town. But in a cold 1960 game versus the Philadelphia Eagles, Gifford would suffer an injury that would put his playing career in serious jeopardy.
Chuck Bednarik, I caught the ball just about the same time he caught me, and then I was coming across the middle, and he hit me in the chest, went back and hit on my butt, and my head snapped back, and the field was semi-frozen at the time, and it was hard. There was no grass or anything like that. And all sort of vague to me because I've seen so many pictures of it. I saw it on film, and I vaguely remember coming into the locker room. And the one thing that I really regret about the injury was that to some people that even defined my career, which is totally ludicrous. But I know that years later, I had an MRI taken of my neck, and I had several vertebrae that had calcium growth over a fracture. And I didn't play anymore that season. Had I played any more, it could have been really serious.
Frank would sit out the entire 1961 season as well, and it looked like his playing days might be over as he set his sights on a new passion.
I'm Frank Gifford. I've been in the league for 10 years. When you're with the Giants, you learn that football is a game of percentages.
I had put my heart and soul into broadcasting and was really enjoying it. And I was doing early and late news, and I did the sports, and I really did love it. And I was the first local sports anchor. It was fun being a first, and it was a good time for me. But all of a sudden I realized I really missed something, and I was driving home from doing the late news one night, living up in Scarsdale at the time, and then having a convertible top down. It was the early day in spring, and it just dawned on me, I said, for God's sake, I could do this the rest of my life, but I can't do that other the rest of my life. And I remember I went in to see Wellington Mara the next day, and I said, I'd like to come back and play.
As you know, the Giants are revealing the top 100 players in the history of the franchise.
The number 4 on this list is Frank Gifford, who was drafted by the Giants in 1952, won the MVP in 1956, and was a multifaceted player, running, receiving, You know, all of us grew up watching him on Monday Night Football.
As Frank Gifford, halfback, I spent 12 wonderful years with the New York Giants, many of those years winding up in championship games. Now, as Frank Gifford, sportscaster, I play an entirely different position.
You know, I think just the amount that he was able to do. He ran, he caught, he threw touchdowns. He was, just a playmaker, and always the big smile, just the big personality, always a delight to be around. And when you think of the New York Giants, he's one of the names that pops up just because what a great character and a great player that he was.
Here's Frank Gifford, most happy to again be a member of the fraternity.
Despite Frank's career-threatening injury in 1961, he would valiantly return to the Giants in 1962.
Well, it was the toughest year of my life football-wise because I went to training camp and they had traded to get a big, tall, speedy end, Aaron Thomas. He was going to be the flanker, and they didn't quite know what to do with me. I wasn't a running back anymore because they were going with a big bull backfield at the time. And once having been the New York Giant, and all of a sudden I was having a hard time even making this football team. And for the first time in many, many years, as the season opened, I was on the bench. And then in the second game, we were playing in Pittsburgh. And Y.A. Tittle was the new quarterback. He didn't know me from Adam. Charlie Connolly had retired, and all of a sudden, he's got me in the huddle with him. And he said, "You got something, Frank?" I said, "Yeah, let's go 1X right, and better split the L-man and circle the B-back." And we needed a big play. It was 3rd and long, and somehow I caught the ball. We get the first down, and we came back, and he said, "What else you got?" "There's got a fly. Give me a fly." And again, he looked at me like, "You out of your mind or something?" And it was the most important catch of my life, I think. And I caught it just by the tip of the ball, and I was back. And I played that season and actually went back to the Pro Bowl as a wide receiver.
Gifford finally retired from the Giants in 1964 and restarted a successful career in broadcasting, highlighted with his role as the play-by-play commentator for ABC's Monday Night Football.
As Frank Gifford, halfback, I spent 12 wonderful years with the New York Giants, many of those years winding up in championship games. Now, as Frank Gifford, sportscaster, I play an entirely different position.
Gifford was one of the first great New York football icons who transcended the game, and almost 60 years later, he's still revered by the Big Blue faithful.
This versatile player made the Pro Bowl on defense and offense in consecutive seasons, playing in 7 overall. The NFL MVP in the 1956 championship season. Hall of Famer number 16, Frank Gifford.
In August of 2015, Big Blue said goodbye to one of their most iconic figures when the legendary Giant and longtime Monday Night Football commentator Frank Gifford passed away at the age of 84.
I loved Frank. For 11 years, I got to stand next to Frank Gifford. Never lost sight of the fact that I was standing next to television history. Just a gentleman, a nice man. And we had a lot of good times together. We had a lot of fun together. Frank Gifford was just a dear man.